Okay, in this video, I'm going to just focus on a couple of things about the start of Matthew's passion narrative. We're not really going to go into all of Matthew's passion narrative, but just point out a couple of things to illustrate some of the distinctiveness of the way in which Matthew tells his story about the week or the events leading up to Jesus' death. So we begin, first of all, by noticing that in Matthew's gospel, we have several predictions about Jesus' crucifixion. This is the fourth time that this occurs in Matthew chapter 26, verses 1 and 2. So if you want to see the other times in which Jesus, indicates that he is going to be betrayed, all of these predictions do not specify that it is by means of crucifixion, but it predicts that he is going to be killed uh, by his opponents or by some opponents. So Jesus knows in advance that he is going to be betrayed. He knows that he will be handed over. He knows that he will be executed by his opponents. So this helps to present Jesus as someone who didn't just happen to accidentally get arrested and executed, but that he knew full well before he ever went to Jerusalem that this was going to happen. Now, Jewish leaders are led by the Sadducean chief priest Caiaphas. This is very important. They meet to plan how to kill Jesus while avoid a riot. So, what all the Gospels indicate is that the impetus for arresting Jesus really comes from the high priest. The Romans are kind of sucked in, as it were, by them to carry out the execution, but that it is the will, the desire of the chief priest, led by Caiaphas, who is the Sadducee. So, oftentimes, many people think that it is the Pharisees who are the ones who had Jesus killed. Pharisees are not really involved in this unless there are some who belong or participate in the Sanhedrin who are not named or identified. But if it's the chief priest, and chief priests at this time were primarily Sadduceans, Sadducees are responsible for this. So Judas offers to help Jewish leaders out of a desire to be paid. So we get this from Matthew 26, verses 14 through 16. But just kind of note, neither Mark nor Luke specify this motive. And so you can look at things about Judas's going to chief priest and to hand over Jesus. It is, it looks like it's the chief priest who want to pay him for this information. It doesn't indicate that that's the reason why he goes to them for that. Now, we might assume that would be the reason, but there could have been other reasons why Judas thought to do this. And maybe Judas thought that Jesus was the Messiah and that these guys want to arrest him, but they're not going to be successful, and therefore he's going to trick them and get paid in some kind of means. So he'll let them know, I'll hand him over to you, I'll show you where he is. They pay him, but he didn't really think that this was going to take place. What's interesting about Judas in the four Gospels is that they all have different ways of talking about Judas and the aftermath of this. So in Mark's account, Judas betrays Jesus, but we don't know what happened to Judas afterwards. It never returns to Judas. So in other words, he just gets off scot-free. In Matthew's version, Judas has this desire to be paid. Now, we don't know if it's because he's lost faith in Jesus or if he's trying to entrap the chief priest because he doesn't think Jesus will really be executed or that Jesus will really be arrested, that he has enough power to withstand this. But when Jesus is arrested and is going to be executed, then Judas seems to have remorse and he ends up killing himself. So he commits suicide. in Luke's account, we don't have anything in the gospel, but then in the book of Acts, there is a description of Judas being successful, getting his money, going out and buying a field, and then some kind of accident happens to Judas, which kind of looks like divine retribution on him. The Gospel of John is like the Gospel of Mark. He introduces that Mark is doing this. Now, in John's Gospel, the Judases will conspire to turn Jesus over to the chief priest because the devil has entered into his heart. So in John's Gospel, and as well as for Luke, this is a demonic activity. He is led or inspired or guided by the devil to do this. Now, neither Mark nor Matthew indicate anything about the devil entering into his heart, but that seems to be something important for John's narrative. So the last thing I'll just mention here is about Jesus identifies Judas as at the Passover meal. So the last meal that Jesus has is a Passover meal, and during this meal, he points to Judas as the one who will betray him. And this does not happen explicitly in Mark and Luke's account. So again, for Matthew, Jesus is presented as someone who knows he's going to be executed, and he knows who his betrayer is. And so, in other words, Jesus is presented, as it were, as somebody who enters into this with full knowledge. He's not a dupe. It wasn't a calculated mistake. All of this is foreknown. So that's just a few of the interesting, distinctive ideas that we find in Matthew's start of his passion narrative.